Under a merciless Arizona sun, Clara Winters stared down the barrel of Taza's rifle. Behind her, his prized Hereford bull shifted nervously in its makeshift pen. The Apache rancher's face remained hard as stone, eyes darker than a new moon night. 2 days of running had led to this moment, cornered in an abandoned mining camp with nowhere left to hide. The stolen ring burned in her pocket, heavy with generations of Apache history. She thought herself clever, desperate enough to risk everything. Now she stood at the precipice of consequences. But instead of the vengeance she expected, Taza lowered his rifle and spoke words that would change everything. The ring or your life. Your choice. Could a woman who'd spent her life taking what wasn't hers learn to build something that would last? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clara's throat went dry as dust. The weight of the turquoise ring seemed to burn through her pocket like a coal. She'd never intended to steal something so personal. The bull was business, a means to an end. The ring had been an accident, discovered in the saddlebag while fleeing in the night. "I'll give back the ring," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "But I need the bull." Taza's expression didn't change. "You need? Or Valdez needs?" The name hit her like a slap. How did he know about her debt? About the gang that held her future in their calloused, violent hands? She shifted her weight, boots scraping against the hard-packed dirt. These boots had carried her across 3 territories, through dust storms and flash floods. They didn't match, the right one a half size too large, the left patched where a rattlesnake had struck 2 winters past. Like everything in her life, they were cobbled together, functional but never quite fitting right. "That's not your concern," she replied, fingers brushing the grip of her pistol. "Don't," Taza warned softly. "You're fast, but not that fast." He was right. Clara had survived 28 years by knowing when she was outmatched. The orphanage had taught her to steal. The streets had taught her to run. But nothing had prepared her for a man who tracked her for 2 days without stopping, who looked at her now not with hatred but with something far more dangerous, consideration. "I owe them money," she admitted. "More than I can repay any honest way. So you chose dishonest. I chose survival." Her chin lifted, "Just like you would." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. A flicker of what might have been respect. Clara had learned to read men's faces early. It was a survival skill, knowing when to run, when to fight, when to charm. But this Apache rancher was different. His weathered face gave away little, yet she sensed a weighing happening behind those dark eyes. She'd picked his ranch carefully. The Apache kept to themselves, proud and separate from the settlements. A widow man with prize stock but few hands to watch it. The perfect target for a woman desperate enough to risk everything. What she hadn't counted on was his skill as a tracker or his determination to reclaim what was his. 3,000, she said suddenly. "That's what I owe Valdez. The bull would fetch at least that from the right buyer. And my mother's ring? What's your price for that?" Shame burned up her neck. "I didn't know what it was when I took it. Found it in the saddlebag. Yet you kept it." Clara reached slowly into her pocket, withdrew the silver and turquoise piece. Sunlight caught the blue stone, making it glow like a piece of sky. "Take it. It was never part of my plan." Taza stepped forward, took the ring with careful fingers. Something in his face softened as he looked at it. A private grief she had no right to witness. "My mother wore this for 40 years, he said quietly. "It was to go to my wife." "You're married?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Was." The word fell between them like a stone. Clara looked away, uncomfortable with the intimacy of that revelation. She'd stolen from a widower, a man who'd already lost enough. Add it to her lengthening list of sins. "What happens now?" she asked, forcing herself to meet his gaze again. Taza tucked the ring into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her threadbare clothes, her defiant stance, the exhaustion she couldn't quite hide. "Now," he said, "we make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "You help me drive this bull back to my ranch. You work to repay what stealing him has cost me in time and trouble. When the debt is settled, you go free with enough money to start fresh somewhere Valdez can't find you." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Why would you offer that to a thief?" "Because," Taza said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips, "you're the first person brave enough or foolish enough to steal from me in 15 years. That deserves something other than a bullet." Clara's mind raced. Work off her debt instead of running? Stay in Valdez territory when they expected payment? Trust this man not to turn her in the moment they reached civilization? Yet what choice did she have? "How long?" she asked. 3 months. Maybe 4. Clara looked at the bull, at the distant mountains, at the man offering her something between mercy and justice. 2 months, she countered. "And I keep my guns." Taza nodded once. 2 months. "But if you run, you'll find me," she finished for him. "I know." Taza watched the woman settle her bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. Her movements were efficient, practiced, a woman used to making camp alone. The silver ring sat heavy in his pocket, its familiar weight both comfort and pain. Sarah had been gone 2 winters now. The fever had taken her quickly, leaving no time for goodbyes, no time to prepare for the silence she left behind. The Chiricahua had a word for it: the emptiness that follows loss, like wind through a canyon. Taza had lived in that wind for 2 years. He drew the ring out, turned it in the firelight. His mother had pressed it into his palm before joining the ancestors, her voice already fading as she whispered, "Find happiness again, my son. This belongs to the woman who will help you rebuild." The thief, Clara, glanced up, caught him studying the ring. Something like guilt crossed her face before she masked it with indifference. "Your wife," she said. "Tell me about her." Taza's jaw tightened. "Why would I share that with the woman who stole from me?" "Because it's a long trail home, and silence makes the miles longer." She poked at the fire with a stick. "Besides, if I'm to work your ranch, I should know something of the people who built it." Fair logic, even from a thief's mouth. "Sarah was Mescalero Apache," he said finally. "Daughter of a horse trader. We met at Fort Bowie during the peace talks." "You fought for the army?" Surprise colored her voice. "I scouted for them. My father believed cooperation was the only path forward for our people." His hand closed around the ring. "Sarah believed the same. We built the ranch together, planted orchards, raised cattle that would thrive in this desert." Clara nodded toward the penned bull. "Including him?" "Especially him. Blackfoot is the future of my herd. Apache cattle bred to survive Arizona summers and still provide good meat." Pride warmed his voice despite himself. 2 years of selective breeding. He's worth more than money. "Legacy," Clara said quietly. Taza looked at her sharply. "Yes." She met his gaze across the flames, and for a moment, he saw something beyond the defiant thief. A flash of understanding, perhaps even respect. "I'm sorry," she said. "About your wife." Taza inclined his head slightly. "What about you? Family waiting somewhere?" A bitter smile. "No. Not the kind that waits, anyway. Yet Valdez found you." Her face hardened. "Valdez finds anyone who can be useful. I was good at acquiring things, until I wasn't." "What changed?" Clara turned away, busying herself with her saddlebag. "I took something that belonged to the wrong person. Valdez had to pay compensation. Now I owe him. And he sent you to steal my bull." "No." She looked back at him. "That was my idea. I heard talk in town. A stubborn Apache with prize stock and too much land for one man to watch. I thought," she shrugged, "I thought it would be easy." Taza allowed himself a small smile. Many make that mistake about the Apache. He rose, checked the bull's pen, then the horses. The night was clear, stars scattered like salt across the black sky. Coyotes called in the distance, storytellers sharing the day's adventures. His grandfather would have read meaning in their voices, predicted tomorrow's fortunes. When he returned to the fire, Clara was still awake, watching him. "Why did you track me yourself?" she asked. "Most ranchers would have gathered a posse." "Most ranchers aren't Apache," he replied. "The bull is my responsibility. The ring was my mother's blessing. Some things a man handles himself." She studied him, this woman with eyes the color of storm clouds. "You didn't shoot me when you had the chance. Would you rather I had?" "No. But I wonder why." Taza considered her question as he added wood to the fire. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure himself. Something about the way she stood her ground, cornered but unbroken. Or perhaps it was simply that he'd seen enough death in his 42 years. "Killing solves less than people think," he said finally. "And it leaves marks on the soul that never wash clean." Clara nodded slowly. "Tomorrow we head north? At first light. It's 3 days to the ranch if the weather holds." He settled back on his bedroll. "Sleep if you can. I'm a light sleeper." A warning, but she only smiled. "So am I, Apache. So am I." Taza closed his fingers around his mother's ring one last time before tucking it safely away. The thief would return with him to the ranch, work off her debt, and be gone. An inconvenience, nothing more. Yet as sleep claimed him, Taza wondered why. For the first time in 2 years, the night felt less empty. Morning arrived with merciless clarity, the kind that exposed every detail of their unlikely partnership. Clara watched Taza prepare coffee over the rekindled fire, his movements deliberate, economical. Nothing wasted, not effort, not water, not words. "I need something in writing," she said as he handed her a tin cup. His eyebrow raised slightly. "You doubt my word? I doubt everyone's word." The coffee was strong, bitter, like medicine. 2 months of work to clear my debt. I want it on paper. Taza considered her for a long moment. "You can read and write. The sisters at St. Agnes made sure of that before I ran away." She sipped the scalding liquid. "Just because I steal doesn't mean I'm stupid." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. He reached into his saddlebag, produced a small notebook and pencil. Clara watched as he tore out a page and began to write in a neat, precise hand. "Name?" he asked without looking up. "Clara Winters." "Age?" She hesitated. 28. Taza nodded, continued writing. When he finished, he handed her the paper. "Read it." Clara scanned the document, surprised by its simplicity and fairness. Asterisk agreement between Taza Dine, rancher, and Clara Winters, laborer. Miss Winters agrees to work at Dine Ranch for a period of 2 months to compensate for the attempted theft of livestock and personal property. In exchange, Mr. Dine will provide room, board, and upon completion of service, payment of $100. Miss Winters retains her personal freedom and possessions, but agrees not to leave the property without escort until her service is complete. Asterisk. $100? She looked up sharply. "That wasn't part of our deal." "You'll need something to start fresh," Taza said matter-of-factly. "Unless you plan to return to stealing." Clara studied him, searching for the trap. Men didn't offer money without expecting something in return. "What kind of work will I be doing exactly?" "Whatever needs doing. Ranch work doesn't sort itself by man or woman." He took a drink of his coffee. "You can ride, obviously. Can you cook? Enough to survive. Garden? If I have to." Taza nodded. "You'll earn your keep. Sign it." Clara hesitated, pencil hovering over the paper. "And if Valdez comes looking?" "My ranch, my problem." There was steel in his voice. "You'll be under my protection while you work off your debt. protection. The word felt foreign, dangerous in its appeal. Clara had protected herself since she was 12 years old, slipping out the orphanage window with nothing but a stolen loaf of bread and a kitchen knife. Protection meant dependency. Dependency meant vulnerability. Yet she signed, her script flowing and graceful beside his angular hand. Taza folded the paper carefully and offered it to her. "Keep it," he said, "a reminder of our agreement." Clara tucked the contract into her jacket pocket, next to the small knife she kept for emergencies. "Don't worry, Apache. I won't forget." They broke camp efficiently, loading supplies onto the packhorse. The bull, Blackfoot, eyed Clara warily as she approached his makeshift pen. "He doesn't like me," she observed. "You stole him from his home." Taza handed her a length of rope. "He has reason to be suspicious." Clara fashioned a lead for the bull, careful to keep her distance from his massive horns. "How do we do this? I've never driven cattle before." "We'll lead him between us. He's not a range bull. He's used to being handled." Taza checked the cinch on his saddle. "But he's still dangerous if spooked. Stay alert." Clara mounted her horse, adjusting to the unfamiliar saddle. She'd stolen the mare along with the bull, a necessary part of her escape plan. Now she wondered if Taza expected that back too. "The horse," she began awkwardly. "Keep her for now," he said, reading her thoughts. "You'll need a mount at the ranch." They set out as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, the bull plodding between them, the desert stretching endlessly ahead. Clara felt the weight of the signed contract in her pocket. A strange thing to have her immediate future written down, agreed upon. Most of her life had been improvisation, reaction, survival. 2 months. She could endure anything for 2 months. Then she'd have enough money to leave Arizona territory altogether. Perhaps head to California, where no one knew her name or her sins. "Stay close," Taza called as they navigated through a narrow wash. "Flash flood came through here recently. Ground's unstable." Clara guided her horse carefully over the rocky terrain, noting how the bull followed Taza's mount with trusting familiarity. Something about the way man and animal moved together spoke of years of care, of relationship built on consistency. She wondered what that might feel like, to trust so completely, to belong somewhere so deeply, to have roots instead of wings. By midday, the sun had transformed from morning promise to afternoon threat. Heat shimmered across the landscape, distorting distant buttes into wavering mirages. Clara's shirt clung to her back, damp with sweat. She'd traveled these territories for years, yet the desert never softened its edges for the familiar. Taza rode slightly ahead, his back straight, seemingly impervious to the heat. He'd removed his hat once to wipe his brow, revealing hair black as obsidian, streaked with silver at the temples. A man in his prime, weathered by sun and experience rather than age. He unfolded a map from his saddlebag, studied it briefly, then changed their course slightly westward. "There's water ahead," he explained when Clara drew alongside him. "A trading post near the old Spanish mission. We'll rest there, continue in the cooler evening." Clara nodded, grateful. The bull was slowing, his massive head lowered against the heat. "He needs water soon." "He's tougher than he looks," Taza replied, but his eyes held concern for the animal. "Apache cattle are bred for endurance, but a bull this size needs more than most." They traveled in silence for another hour, following a trail so faint Clara would have missed it alone. Eventually, the broken stones of an abandoned mission emerged from the heat haze, its bell tower still standing sentinel over the remains of its nave. "The mission's dry," Taza said, "but there's a spring behind it. The Martinez family built a trading post there 20 years ago." As they approached, Clara tensed, scanning for movement. Trading posts meant people. People meant witnesses, questions, complications. "Relax," Taza said, noting her vigilance. "The Martinez family knows me. We trade regularly. And if they've heard about a stolen bull? A woman thief. News travels slowly out here. He glanced at her. Besides, you're with me now. That changes the story. They dismounted in the sparse shade of a cottonwood tree. Clara led the horses to water while Taza tended to the bull. The trading post was little more than a low adobe building with a wooden porch, surprisingly well-maintained amid the mission ruins. An older Mexican man emerged, wiping his hands on a cloth. His weathered face broke into a smile. Taza, mi amigo. He embraced the Apache briefly. What brings you this far from your ranch? Retrieving what's mine, Miguel. Taza nodded toward the bull. Had a bit of trouble. Miguel's eyes widened, then shifted to Clara. She braced herself for accusation, but the man only offered a polite nod. Your new ranch hand? He asked Taza. Something like that, Taza replied. We need supplies. Jerky, coffee, grain for the horses. While the men conducted business, Clara refilled their canteens at the spring. The water ran clear and cold, defying the desert heat. She splashed some on her face, savoring the momentary relief. A folded paper fell from her pocket as she straightened. The contract. She quickly retrieved it, checking that the ink hadn't smudged. The agreement looked almost absurd in this setting, civilization's formality amid wilderness. Yet she refolded it carefully, returned it to her pocket. When she rejoined Taza, he was securing supplies to the packhorse. Miguel had retreated to the cool interior of his store. We'll camp here tonight, Taza announced. Continue at first light. Clara frowned. We could cover more ground before sunset. The trail ahead crosses open country. Better to do it in morning light. He nodded toward the mission ruins. The old chapel still has most of its roof. It'll be cooler than sleeping outside. They established camp in the skeletal remains of the chapel, its stone walls providing welcome shade. Clara arranged her bedroll near the former altar, while Taza chose a spot near the doorway. Positioned, she noted, between her and any potential exit. You still don't trust me? She observed as they shared a simple meal of jerky and flatbread. Should I? His dark eyes reflected the dying sunlight. I signed your contract. Paper is easier to break than a promise. He took a drink from his canteen. And you haven't promised anything. Clara couldn't argue with his logic. She'd been planning her escape since the moment she signed. Wait until he slept, take the horses, disappear into the network of canyons she knew better than most. The contract wouldn't stop her. Yet something else gave her pause. Not fear of his tracking skills, though they were formidable. Not even the lure of the $100 promised upon completion. It was the way he treated the bull with respect rather than ownership. The way he spoke to Miguel as an equal, not an inferior. The way he'd offered her this strange second chance when most men would have demanded justice. I won't run tonight, she said suddenly. Taza looked up, surprise briefly crossing his features. I can't promise for tomorrow, she added. But tonight you can sleep without worrying. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good enough for now. As darkness claimed the desert, Clara lay awake, listening to Taza's steady breathing. The man slept like a soldier, alert even in rest. The bull snorted occasionally from its makeshift pen, a reassuring sound in the vast silence. For the first time in months, Clara fell asleep without planning her next escape. Dawn arrived with a gift of cooler air and cloud-streaked skies. Clara woke to find Taza already loading the horses, his movements precise in the pale light. She rose quickly, folding her bedroll with practiced efficiency. Storm coming, Taza said, nodding toward the western horizon where dark clouds gathered. We need to cross Diablo Canyon before the rain hits. Clara tensed. Diablo Canyon? That's Valdez territory. It's the fastest way home. He handed her a piece of jerky and a biscuit. Eat while we ride. They set out as the sun crested the mountains. the bull surprisingly energetic after a night's rest. The trail narrowed as they approached the canyon, forcing them to ride single file, Taza leading, Clara bringing up the rear with the bull between them. The canyon's entrance loomed ahead, a jagged slash in the earth, its walls rising hundreds of feet on either side. Clara had only passed through once before, and never with something as valuable as a prize bull. Valdez's men often used these natural choke points to ambush travelers. "Are you sure about this?" she called ahead. "There's a longer route around the northern rim." "Too long," Taza replied without turning. "The storm won't wait." He was right. The air had grown heavy, electric with the promise of rain. In the desert, storms transformed dry washes into raging rivers within minutes. Being caught in a slot canyon during a flash flood meant certain death. They entered the canyon in tense silence, hooves echoing against stone walls. The passage narrowed further until the bull's flanks nearly brushed the rock on either side. Clara found herself holding her breath at the tightest sections, urging the massive animal forward with soft words and gentle pressure. Halfway through, Taza raised his hand, signaling a halt. He dismounted, examining the ground with focused intensity. "What is it?" Clara asked, her hand drifting to her pistol. "Tracks fresh." He pointed to barely perceptible marks in the sandy soil. "3 horses, heading in the same direction we are." "Valdez." "Maybe." He straightened, scanning the canyon walls. "Or just travelers." A distant rumble of thunder punctuated his words. The bull shifted nervously, sensing the approaching storm. "We need to move," Taza said, remounting. "Stay alert." They continued at a quicker pace, the canyon walls occasionally giving way to wider sections where stunted junipers clung to rocky shelves. The air grew heavier, the light dimming as clouds thickened overhead. Clara felt it first. A single drop of rain on her cheek, then another on her hand. Within minutes, a light drizzle descended, dampening dust and darkening stone. The path beneath them began to glisten. "There," Taza pointed ahead to where the canyon widened significantly. "We'll wait it out there." They had just reached the wider section when the sky opened. Rain fell in silver sheets, transforming the canyon floor into a network of rivulets that quickly joined forces. The bull bellowed in distress, pulling at his lead rope. "The high ground!" Taza shouted over the downpour, pointing to a natural stone shelf about 10 feet above the canyon floor. "Get the animals up there." Clara didn't hesitate. She dismounted, leading her horse toward the incline Taza had indicated. The footing was treacherous, mud slicking the natural steps, but the mare climbed steadily. Taza struggled with the bull, the massive animal balking at the unfamiliar terrain. Water was already ankle-deep and rising rapidly. "He won't move," Taza called, his voice nearly lost in the storm's roar. Clara secured her horse and slid back down to help. The bull's eyes rolled white with fear as water swirled around his legs. "The supplies," she said suddenly. "His weight plus the packs. It's too much." Without waiting for approval, she cut the packs from Taza's horse, allowing the frightened animal to scramble unencumbered up the slope. The precious supplies tumbled into the rising water. "What are you doing?" Taza yelled. "Saving your damn bull." Clara splashed through the churning water, grabbed the bull's lead rope alongside Taza. Together, on 3, they pulled in unison, coaxing and commanding. For a terrifying moment, the bull refused to move. Then, with a desperate lunge, he surged forward, finding footing on the stone shelf just as a wall of muddy water rushed through the canyon below. Clara collapsed against the rock wall, soaked and breathless. Taza crouched beside her, equally drenched. "The supplies," he said, scanning the churning water below. "Better than losing the bull." Clara pushed wet hair from her face. "Or you." Their eyes met, something unspoken passing between them. Then Taza reached for his canteen, miraculously still attached to his saddle. "Here." He offered it to her first. It's going to be a long wait. Clara accepted the canteen, their fingers brushing briefly. The water tasted of metal and minerals, somehow sweeter for being shared. That was quick thinking, Taza said after a moment, cutting loose the supplies. Clara shrugged. I'm good at making fast decisions. Even when they're not in your best interest? She looked at him, surprised by the question. The bull is more valuable than whatever was in those packs. True. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. But now we have to share one canteen. For the first time since their unlikely partnership began, Clara laughed. A genuine sound of surprised amusement. After a moment, Taza joined her, his deep chuckle blending with the storm's diminishing fury. The storm passed as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Water still flowed through the canyon below, but the raging torrent had subsided to a manageable stream. The late afternoon sun broke through scattered clouds, turning puddles into mirrors. We can move on soon, Taza said, surveying the receding water. But we've lost time. We'll have to camp in the open tonight. Clara nodded, her mind elsewhere. They were entering the heart of Valdez territory, a patchwork of homesteads, small ranches, and hidden camps where the gang stored stolen goods. Every settlement, every trail junction increased the chance of recognition. Here, Taza offered her the last of the jerky salvaged from his saddlebags. We'll need to hunt tomorrow unless we reach a settlement. As they prepared to descend from their rocky shelter, Clara noticed a weathered wanted poster plastered to a canyon wall, somehow surviving the downpour. Her own face stared back at her, a crude sketch, but recognizable enough to make her stomach clench. She ripped it down before Taza could see it, crumpling the soggy paper into her pocket. But when she turned, he was watching her, his expression unreadable. How much? He asked quietly. What? The bounty. How much are you worth to Valdez? Clara swallowed. $500. Dead or alive? Taza's eyebrows rose slightly. You must have taken something very valuable, or hurt someone very important. She turned away, busying herself with checking her horse's saddle. Does it matter? You already have me working off my debt. It matters if Valdez men are looking for you. Taza's voice held no judgment, only practical concern. $500 buys a lot of eyes. They descended carefully to the canyon floor, leading the animals over slippery rock. The bull seemed grateful for solid ground, immediately lowering his head to drink from a freshly formed pool. We should keep moving, Clara urged, scanning the canyon walls nervously. Taza studied her face, then nodded. There's a line shack about 2 hours north. Old boundary marker from when this was still Mexico. We can shelter there tonight. They rode in watchful silence as afternoon surrendered to evening. The landscape opened gradually from canyon to rolling hills dotted with yucca and mesquite. In the distance, a single peak rose above the others, a landmark Clara recognized with dread. Diablo Mountain, she murmured. Valdez's headquarters are on the eastern slope. Taza glanced at her. You know his operation well. I worked for him for almost a year. The admission came reluctantly. Small jobs at first, scouting, carrying messages. Then larger thefts. Until something went wrong. Clara nodded, her face tight with the memory. I was supposed to steal account ledgers from a bank in Tucson. Evidence of Valdez's dealings with corrupt officials. The banker caught me, recognized me. She looked away. I panicked. He ended up with a bullet in his shoulder. You shot him? I didn't mean to. The old shame burned fresh. The gun just went off. He lived, but Valdez had to pay to keep him quiet. Now I owe Valdez the money, plus interest. Taza absorbed this information in silence. Clara waited for judgment or disgust, but his expression remained neutral. The line shack is just over that ridge, he said finally, pointing ahead. From there, we need a plan. We can't simply ride through Valdez territory with his prize bull. His bull? Clara frowned. From his perspective. Taza's lips curved slightly. Though he's mistaken. As they crested the ridge, the line shack came into view. A small, sturdy structure of stone and timber that had weathered decades of desert storms. Taza dismounted first, checking the perimeter before allowing Clara to approach with the animals. Inside, the shack was bare but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while a rough wooden table and single chair stood in the center. A narrow cot occupied the far corner. "We'll need a story," Taza said as they settled in. "If we're stopped or questioned." Clara nodded, lighting a small fire in the hearth. "I could be your prisoner. You caught me stealing and—" "No." Taza shook his head firmly. "That would only invite them to take you from me. And the bull." "Then what?" He considered for a moment. "Husband and wife. Traveling to my ranch after visiting your family." Clara stared at him. No one would believe an Apache married a white woman. "It happens. Not often, but enough." His eyes met hers steadily. "More importantly, it gives us a reason to be together that few would question. A man has rights over his wife that even Valdez would hesitate to challenge." The logic was sound, but the suggestion made Clara's cheeks warm unexpectedly. "Fine. Husband and wife. But we'll need more than words to make it convincing." "Agreed." Taza reached into his saddlebag and produced a small leather pouch. From it, he withdrew a silver band, simple, unadorned. "This was my father's. It will serve for now." Clara accepted the ring with surprising reluctance. "And what about my supposed family? Where are we coming from?" "Silver City. Mining family." Taza's plan was methodical, thorough. Keep the story simple, consistent. The more details, the more chances to be caught in a lie. As darkness claimed the desert, they took turns keeping watch. When it was Clara's turn, she sat by the door, pistol ready in her lap. The bull and horses rested peacefully in the small corral beside the shack. On her finger, Taza's father's ring caught occasional gleams from the dying fire. A simple prop in their deception, yet it felt strangely significant against her skin. A weight both foreign and somehow right. They departed at first light, Clara adjusting uncomfortably to her new role. The silver band felt foreign on her finger, a weight that carried meaning she'd never considered bearing. Taza seemed unaffected by their charade, his demeanor unchanged as they navigated the rolling terrain. "There's a trading post at the crossroads ahead," he informed her as they rode. "Run by a man named Hollister. We need supplies." Clara frowned. "Is it safe?" "Hollister deals with everyone, settlers, Apache, outlaws. He doesn't ask questions as long as the money's good." Taza glanced at her. "But he knows Valdez, and his men frequent the place." "Then we should avoid it." "We need supplies," Taza repeated firmly. "And information. Hollister knows everything that happens in this territory." Clara fell silent, anxiety gnawing at her. The trading post appeared on the horizon an hour later, a sprawling adobe structure with a broad porch and hitching posts lined with horses. "Too many horses." "Busy today," Taza observed, his voice neutral but his eyes alert. They approached cautiously, Clara keeping close to Taza's side. The bull, exhausted from their journey, followed docilely. As they dismounted, a tall man with a silver beard emerged from the trading post. "Taza!" he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Didn't expect to see you this far from your ranch." "Hollister." Taza nodded in greeting. "We need supplies. Lost most of ours in yesterday's flash flood." The older man's gaze shifted to Clara, then to the bull. Something like recognition flickered in his eyes before he masked it with a trader's practiced neutrality. "Fine animal," he commented. "Prize stock." "My best bull," Taza confirmed. "And this is my wife, Clara." Hollister's eyebrows rose slightly, but he offered a polite nod. Ma'am, first time seeing you in these parts. Clara smiled tightly. We were visiting my family in Silver City. That so? Hollister held her gaze a beat too long. Well, come in. Got everything you might need. Inside, the trading post was dim and crowded with merchandise. Stacked canned goods, barrels of flour and sugar, tools hanging from rafters. The air smelled of leather, tobacco, and the sharp tang of whiskey. 3 men sat at a rough table near the back, playing cards and drinking despite the early hour. Clara kept her head down, positioning herself with her back to the card players. Taza began selecting supplies: coffee, flour, beans, ammunition. Hollister watched them with thinly veiled curiosity. Heard there was trouble on the Silver City Road, the trader commented casually. Bandits hit a stage 2 days back. We came through the canyon, Taza replied. Saw no one until the storm hit. One of the card players looked up at the mention of the canyon. Clara felt his gaze on her back, burning like a brand. She moved closer to Taza, touching his arm in what she hoped appeared to be a wifely gesture. Need a few things, she murmured. Women's items. Understanding her strategy, Taza nodded. Get what you need. Clara moved to a more secluded corner of the store, ostensibly examining bolts of fabric. From this position, she could watch the card players in the reflection of a cloudy mirror hung behind the counter. One man, broad-shouldered with a pockmarked face, was studying her with dangerous intensity. Her heart thundered. Diego Reyes, one of Valdez's lieutenants. He'd seen her wanted poster, perhaps even carried it. It was only a matter of time before he recognized her. Taza finished his transaction, paying with silver coins that clinked heavily on the counter. As Clara rejoined him, he surprised her by placing a small silver hair comb in her palm. For you, he said, his voice carrying just enough for others to hear. To replace the one you lost in the storm. The unexpected gesture caught her off guard. The comb was simple but beautiful, polished silver with a turquoise stone set in its handle. A gift meant to reinforce their charade, yet the thoughtfulness behind it seemed genuine. Thank you, she managed, tucking it into her hair with fingers that only slightly trembled. As they gathered their supplies, Reyes stood, moving casually toward the counter. Clara tensed, readying herself for recognition, accusation, violence. Instead, Taza did something that stunned her. He placed his hand at the small of her back, leaned in, and pressed a brief kiss to her temple. Ready to go home, wife? He asked, his voice carrying a tenderness she'd never heard before. The casual intimacy of the gesture was so unexpected, so convincing, that even Reyes hesitated, doubt crossing his face. Yes, Clara replied, finding her voice. I'm ready. They departed with deliberate unhurriedness, loading their supplies as Reyes watched from the doorway. Only when they were mounted and moving away did Clara allow herself to breathe normally. He recognized me, she whispered once they were out of earshot. Reyes. He's one of Valdez's men. I know. Taza's voice was grim. He'll report to Valdez by nightfall. We need to change course, find another way. No. Taza's decision was firm. That would confirm his suspicions. We continue as planned, but faster. We can reach the edge of Valdez territory by tomorrow if we push hard. Clara touched the silver comb in her hair, still processing Taza's convincing performance. That was well played back there. A faint smile touched his lips. My father taught me that sometimes the best defense is to be exactly what others least expect. The trading post receded behind them, but Clara felt Rhea's suspicious gaze following them across the miles. She adjusted her hat lower, the silver band on her finger catching the sunlight. Wife. The word echoed strangely in her mind, foreign yet somehow less frightening than it had been that morning. They pushed hard until sunset, following game trails and dry creek beds to avoid the main roads. The bull showed signs of fatigue, his massive head hanging low as they finally stopped to make camp in a sheltered grove of cottonwoods. "We crossed Running Wolf Creek," Taza said as he unsaddled the horses. "We're making good time." Clara nodded, too exhausted to speak. Her body ached from the long hours in the saddle, tension knotting her shoulders. While Taza tended the animals, she gathered wood for a small fire, keeping it low to minimize visibility. The night descended with desert swiftness, stars emerging in brilliant clusters across the darkening sky. After a simple meal of beans and hardtack from their new supplies, Clara found herself staring into the flames, thoughts drifting back to the trading post. "You're good at it," she said suddenly. Taza looked up. "At what?" "Pretending." She twisted the silver band on her finger. "Being a husband. The kiss, the gift." Hollister believed it. Even Reyes seemed convinced. Something unreadable crossed Taza's face. "I was a husband once. It's not something you forget." The quiet admission hung in the night air. Clara had avoided personal questions since learning of his widowhood, sensing the raw edge of grief that still surrounded the topic. "How long were you married?" she asked, surprising herself with her own curiosity. 7 years. Taza poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. "Not long enough." Clara watched the firelight play across his features, softening the angles of his face. "You loved her very much." It wasn't a question, but Taza nodded anyway. "She was everything I never knew I needed." He looked up, meeting Clara's gaze across the flames. "What about you? Ever been close to marriage?" Clara gave a short, humorless laugh. "Not likely. Men don't marry women like me." "What kind is that?" "Thieves. Drifters." She shrugged. "Women with pasts. Everyone has a past. Not everyone has wanted posters." Taza conceded the point with a slight nod. "How did you start?" "Stealing." Clara hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing her history. Yet something about the night, the isolation, the false intimacy of their pretended marriage loosened her guard. "I was 12 when I left the orphanage," she began. "Sisters of Mercy, they called themselves. Wasn't much mercy to be found there." She stared into the fire. "First thing I stole was bread. Then clothes. Eventually, a horse." A faint smile touched her lips. "Got caught that time. Sheriff's son took pity on me. Taught me to ride properly in exchange for stable work. Kind of him. He wanted more than stable work eventually." Her voice hardened. "I left town that night with his father's pocket watch and enough money for a week's meals." Taza listened without judgment, his silence encouraging rather than condemning. "After that, I learned to be smarter. Smaller thefts, nothing traceable. Worked as a laundress sometimes, or in kitchens." She shrugged. "Then I met Valdez. He offered steady pay for what I was already good at. Until the banker in Tucson." Clara nodded, the memory still sharp with regret. "I'd never shot anyone before. Never meant to hurt him." The look on his face. She trailed off, swallowing hard. "Valdez was furious. Said I'd drawn unwanted attention. He paid off the banker, but at a price. Your debt. $3,000. Plus whatever he decides to add for interest or inconvenience." She laughed bitterly. "I'd have to steal 100 prize bulls to pay that." Taza reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a quilt, old, well-worn, its pattern still visible in the firelight. Star motifs in indigo and crimson formed intricate constellations across the fabric. "Here." He offered it to her. "The nights are getting colder." Clara accepted the quilt with surprise. "What about you?" "I have my blanket." He nodded toward the simple wool covering beside his bedroll. "The quilt was my grandmother's. She used to say it carries the warmth of ancestors." Clara ran her fingers over the careful stitching, evidence of hours of patient work. "It's beautiful. She made it for my wedding." His voice was soft with memory. said the stars would guide us through dark times. The intimacy of the gesture, sharing something so personal, left Clara momentarily speechless. She wrapped the quilt around her shoulders, its weight somehow comforting. "Thank you," she said finally, "for the quilt, and for listening." Taza nodded, his eyes reflecting the dying flames. "We should rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." As Clara settled onto her bedroll, the quilt drawn close around her, she found herself studying Taza's profile as he took first watch. The stoic rancher who'd tracked her across the desert, the widower who still carried his grief like a companion, the man who'd kissed her temple with surprising gentleness to maintain their charade. Who was he really? And why did the question suddenly matter so much? Under the vast desert sky, wrapped in his grandmother's quilt, Clara slept more deeply than she had in years. She dreamed not of escape or pursuit, but of silver combs and cottonwood groves and a hand steady at the small of her back. Dawn arrived with deceptive serenity, soft light painting the landscape in gentle gold, dew glistening on sage and creosote. Clara woke to the sound of Taza speaking softly to the bull in his native tongue, checking the animal's condition before their day's journey. They broke camp efficiently, sharing coffee but few words. Something had shifted during the night. A barrier lowered, a distance shortened. Clara found herself watching Taza's hands as he adjusted his saddle, noting their strength and precision. "We'll follow the eastern ridge," he said as they mounted. "Less exposed than the valley floor." Clara nodded, scanning the horizon with practiced wariness. "How far to your ranch from here?" 2 days if we push hard. 3 if we're cautious." They set out along the rocky ridge, the terrain slowing their pace but providing better visibility of the surrounding landscape. The bull trudged steadily between them, seemingly resigned to the journey. By mid-morning, they'd covered several miles of difficult ground. The sun beat down relentlessly, and Clara found herself reaching for Taza's canteen when hers ran dry. The casual sharing of water unthinkable days earlier now seemed natural. "There's a narrow pass ahead," Taza informed her, pointing to where the ridge squeezed between 2 rock formations. "Stay alert. It's a natural bottleneck." Clara tensed, her hand moving instinctively to her pistol. "You think Reyes had time to set up an ambush?" "Possibly." Taza's expression was grim. "Or they could have men patrolling already. Either way, we proceed with caution." They dismounted, leading the animals slowly toward the pass. Clara's every sense sharpened, attuned to the smallest sounds. A pebble dislodged, a bird falling silent. The space between her shoulder blades itched with the anticipation of a bullet. The pass narrowed to barely 12 feet wide, stone walls rising sharply on either side. Perfect ambush territory. They were halfway through when Clara spotted it, a flash of metal in the rocks above. "Taza!" she shouted, drawing her pistol in the same motion. The first shot cracked against stone inches from Taza's head. The second struck the ground near the bull, sending the massive animal into a panic. As it bellowed and reared, more shots rang out from multiple positions. 3 shooters, Taza called, taking cover behind a boulder and returning fire. 2 above, 1 ahead. Clara ducked behind the frightened bull, using its bulk as temporary cover while searching for the hidden attackers. She spotted one, a man in a dusty duster positioned on a ledge to their right. Taking careful aim, she fired twice. The man jerked backward, then scrambled away, wounded but alive. The bull, terrified by the gunfire, broke free from its lead rope and charged forward through the pass, nearly trampling the ambusher positioned there. The man dove aside, losing his rifle in the process. Taza seized the opportunity, rushing forward to engage the disarmed attacker. Clara provided covering fire against the remaining shooter above, forcing him to keep his head down. Through the chaos, she caught glimpses of Taza locked in hand-to-hand combat. A brutal, efficient exchange that ended with his opponent unconscious. The remaining shooter, seeing his companions defeated, fired a few desperate rounds before retreating. "Taza!" Clara called when the gunfire ceased. "Are you hit?" "No." His voice was tight with tension. "You?" "I'm fine." The bull ran ahead. "We need to find him before he injures himself." Taza emerged from cover, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "Or before Valdez's men circle back with reinforcements." Clara hurried to his side, her eyes fixed on the wound. "You're bleeding." "Just a graze." He wiped at it impatiently. "The horses?" "Still here, spooked but unharmed." They retrieved the nervous animals and proceeded cautiously through the remainder of the pass. The unconscious ambusher had been dragged aside by his fleeing companion, leaving only bloodstains on the rocks. "You recognized them?" Taza asked as they mounted. Clara nodded grimly. "Valdez's men. Not his best, or we'd be dead." They found the bull a quarter-mile ahead, trapped in a box canyon, panting heavily from exertion and fear. Its powerful bulk had weathered the ambush unscathed, but the saddle horn on Taza's horse bore evidence of their close call, splintered by a bullet that might otherwise have found human flesh. Clara ran her fingers over the damaged horn, a chill running through her despite the desert heat. "That was meant for you." Taza nodded, examining the bullet's path. "Or you." "They'll try again." "Yes." His eyes met hers, serious but steady. "Next time they'll send more men." Clara swallowed hard, guilt constricting her chest. "This is my fault. I brought this danger to you." To her surprise, Taza shook his head. "You didn't pull the trigger. Valdez did." "Still, if I hadn't stolen your bull, then we wouldn't be here." Taza's hand touched her arm briefly, a gesture of reassurance, connection. "And I wouldn't have had someone watching my back in that pass." The unexpected acknowledgement silenced her. She'd been prepared for blame, not gratitude. "We protected each other," Taza continued simply. "That's what matters now." As they led the recovered bull away from the ambush site, Clara found herself studying Taza with new eyes. His calm in the face of danger, his skill in combat, his lack of recrimination, all spoke of a man different from any she'd known. "You fought well back there," she said finally. "Not many ranchers handle themselves like that." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not many ranchers spent 5 years as an army scout before settling down." "Is that how you learned to track so well?" "The army refined what my father taught me." He glanced at her. "Just as someone taught you to shoot with that kind of accuracy." Clara smiled faintly. "That would be Jessup Wells. Bank robber I rode with for a while. Said I had a natural eye." He was right. The compliment, delivered matter-of-factly, warmed her unexpectedly. They rode in companionable silence, alert but no longer rigid with tension. Something had changed in the chaos of the ambush. Allies forged in gunfire, trust tested and confirmed. The bullet-damaged saddle horn between them served as tangible proof of how quickly life could end, how close they'd come to losing everything, including each other. By late afternoon, the adrenaline of the ambush had faded, leaving aching muscles and heightened awareness in its wake. Clara winced as she shifted in the saddle, her right arm stiffening from a graze she'd concealed during their escape. Blood had dried in a thin streak down her sleeve, but the wound itself seemed minor, until movement sent fire through her shoulder. Taza noticed her discomfort. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." She straightened, masking a grimace. "Barely a scratch." His eyes narrowed, but he didn't challenge her claim. Instead, he altered their course slightly, guiding them toward a distant cluster of cottonwoods nestled against a rocky outcropping. "There's a place ahead," he said. "Hidden Springs. We can rest there, tend to our injuries." Clara wanted to argue, to push onward and put more distance between them and Valdez's men. But the bull was flagging, its massive head hanging low with exhaustion, and her arm throbbed with increasing intensity. "Just for a few hours," she conceded. The springs were indeed well hidden, a series of small pools tucked behind massive boulders, invisible until they were nearly upon them. Steam rose from the water, carrying a faint mineral scent into the cooling afternoon air. Hot springs, Taza explained as they dismounted. The Apache have used these waters for healing since before the Spanish came. He secured the animals in a natural enclosure formed by the rocks, ensuring the bull had access to water and the sparse desert grass. Clara watched his methodical movements, noting the blood still caked along his temple despite his earlier attempts to clean the wound. "Your head needs tending," she said as he rejoined her. "As does your arm." His tone brooked no denial. "The water will help. It carries medicines from the earth." Clara followed him to the largest of the pools, where steam curled invitingly above clear water. Smooth stones lined the natural basin, worn by centuries of use. "I'll check the perimeter," Taza said. "You should bathe your wound." He turned away, offering privacy that Clara hadn't expected. Once alone, she carefully removed her jacket and rolled up her sleeve, revealing an angry red furrow where the bullet had grazed her upper arm. The wound was shallow but inflamed, crusted with dried blood and desert dust. She eased her arm into the hot water, biting back a hiss as the minerals stung the open flesh. Gradually, the initial pain gave way to a soothing warmth that seemed to penetrate deep into the muscle. Clara found herself relaxing for the first time in days, the spring's heat unwinding knots of tension she'd carried since the moment Taza had found her with his bull. She was still soaking her arm when Taza returned, carrying a small pouch made of deer hide. "The area is secure," he reported. "No signs of pursuit yet." He knelt beside her, opening the pouch to reveal dried plants and roots, a collection of herbs carried for emergencies. With practiced hands, he selected several leaves, crushing them between his fingers and adding them to a small tin cup of hot spring water. "What is that?" Clara asked, watching the water turn a deep green. ****, he replied. "What your people call sage. And this?" He held up a twisted root. "Isael lichii, helps prevent infection." He worked with quiet efficiency, creating a poultice from the steeped herbs. When it was ready, he looked at her expectantly. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her wounded arm. The request, his careful respect for her boundaries, touched her unexpectedly. Clara nodded, extending her arm toward him. Taza's touch was gentle but sure as he applied the herbal mixture to her wound. His fingers moved with practiced precision, spreading the medicine with just enough pressure to be thorough without causing pain. The poultice carried a sharp, clean scent and left a cooling sensation in its wake. "Where did you learn this?" she asked, watching him work. "My grandmother was a healer." He wrapped a clean strip of cloth around her arm to secure the poultice. "She taught me which plants carry medicine, how to use them when doctors are too far away." When he finished with her arm, Clara insisted on tending to the cut above his eye. The wound was deeper than he'd admitted, still seeping blood when she carefully cleaned it with spring water. "You're lucky," she murmured, applying the remaining poultice. "An inch lower and you might have lost an eye." "Luck had less to do with it than your warning," Taza replied. Their faces were close as she worked, his breath warm against her cheek. "You saved my life in that pass." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Acknowledgement of a debt that went beyond stolen bulls and signed contracts. Clara looked away first, suddenly aware of their proximity. "We saved each other," she said, echoing his earlier words. As evening approached, they shared a small meal of jerky and dried fruit from their supplies. The hot springs had worked their magic, easing pain and restoring energy. Clara flexed her bandaged arm, finding the movement less painful than before. "Your grandmother's medicine works well," she observed. Taza nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. The old ways still have power, even in these changing times. They settled by a small, carefully banked fire, taking turns watching while the other rested. During her watch, Clara found herself studying Taza's sleeping form, the strong profile, the hands that had so carefully tended her wound. His vulnerability in sleep stirred something protective in her, something she'd rarely felt toward anyone. In the quiet of the desert night, surrounded by ancient healing waters and sheltered by timeless stone, Clara acknowledged a troubling truth. She no longer wanted to run from this man. Somehow, between the moment he'd tracked her down and now, Taza had become someone she couldn't bear to betray. The realization terrified her more than Valdez's bullets ever could. They departed the healing springs at dawn, both refreshed and somehow changed by the night's unexpected respite. Clara's arms still ached, but the angry redness had faded, and Taza's head wound had closed cleanly. The bull, too, seemed restored by the brief rest, moving with renewed vigor as they resumed their journey. "We'll cross into my territory by midday," Taza said as they rode. "Another day after that to reach the ranch house." Clara nodded, trying to ignore the conflicting emotions that news stirred within her. Their arrival at the ranch would mark the beginning of her indentured service, and the end of the strange, intimate journey that had transformed her from thief to what? Not quite friend, not quite partner. Something undefined yet undeniably significant. The landscape began to change subtly around them. More juniper and pine appearing among the desert scrub, the terrain rising gradually. By noon, they crested a hill that offered their first expansive view of what lay ahead. There, Taza pointed toward the distant horizon. The valley with the river running through it. That's the northern edge of Dine Ranch. Clara followed his gesture, taking in the surprisingly verdant valley nestled among rugged mountains. Even from this distance, she could make out patches of cultivated land, a ribbon of silver water, and what appeared to be fruit trees surrounding distant structures. "It's bigger than I expected," she admitted. Pride warmed Taza's voice. 3,000 acres, most of it grazing land, but we have orchards near the river, fields for corn and beans. "We, my ranch hands, for men who've worked the land with me for years. 2 Apache, 2 Mexican." He glanced at her. "They'll be watching for my return. Probably worried by now." Clara tensed slightly. "How will you explain me? And the bull? The truth?" Taza's expression was unreadable. "That you took what wasn't yours, and now you're working to make it right." The blunt assessment stung more than it should have. After everything they'd been through, the ambush, the healing, the nights of shared stories, she was still, at heart, just a thief to him. "Of course," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "That's what I am, after all." Taza studied her for a moment, something unspoken in his dark eyes. Before he could respond, a low rumble of thunder drew their attention to the western sky. Dark clouds were building with ominous speed, a curtain of rain already visible in the distance. "Storm coming," he observed. "A big one." Clara eyed the approaching weather with concern. "Can we reach the valley before it hits?" "No." Taza surveyed their surroundings with practiced efficiency. "But there's an old line cabin about an hour ahead. We can shelter there until it passes." They pushed their pace, racing the advancing storm front. The wind rose steadily, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. The bull grew increasingly nervous, requiring constant coaxing to keep moving forward. They reached the line cabin just as the first heavy drops began to fall. A small, sturdy structure built of logs and stone, tucked against a hillside for protection from the elements. Inside, it was sparse but sound, containing a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and a single cot against the far wall. "Not much, but it's dry," Taza said as they hurried to secure the animals under an adjacent lean-to. By the time they'd settled the bull and horses, the storm had arrived in full fury. They dashed the final few yards to the cabin through pelting rain, closing the door against wind that threatened to tear it from its hinges. Clara stood dripping on the threshold, suddenly aware of the cabin's intimate confines. After days in the open desert, The small space felt almost claustrophobic, especially with Taza's tall frame occupying so much of it. "I'll get a fire started," he said, moving to the fireplace where split wood had been neatly stacked by some previous occupant. Clara busied herself wringing water from her hair and jacket, trying to ignore the unexpected awkwardness that had descended between them. Outside, thunder crashed with increasing violence, rattling the cabin's single window. "Looks like we might be here a while," Taza observed as flames began to catch in the fireplace. "These summer storms can last for hours." Clara nodded, settling on the floor near the growing fire. Her gaze fell on Taza's saddlebag, where a folded document protruded slightly, yellowed paper with official seals. Noticing her interest, Taza withdrew the document and handed it to her without comment. Clara unfolded it carefully, revealing a land deed written in flowing script, official recognition of Taza Dinah's ownership of the property they'd viewed from the hilltop. "You actually own the land," she said, surprised. "Legally. Did you think I didn't?" Clara shrugged. "Most Apache I've known live on reservations. The government doesn't usually allow." "My father fought for that deed," Taza explained, his voice quiet but intense. "He scouted for the army for 15 years, saved a colonel's life during the campaigns. When peace came, the colonel helped secure the land grant as payment for his service." Clara studied the document with new respect. "Your father must have been an extraordinary man. He believed in building a future where Apache could live with dignity, on their own terms." Taza took the deed back, folding it with reverent care. "The ranch is his legacy, and now it's yours to protect." Clara stared into the fire, a hollow feeling expanding in her chest. "No wonder you tracked me so relentlessly. It wasn't just about the bull or the ring." Taza's eyes met hers across the flames. "It was about what they represent, future and past. Things worth fighting for." The simplicity of his declaration silenced her. Clara had never owned anything worth fighting for, had never stayed in one place long enough to build something meaningful. Her life had been a series of temporary shelters, brief alliances, and swift departures. Yet as she sat in the sturdy cabin on the edge of Taza's land, watching rain lash the windows and listening to the comfortable crackle of the fire he'd built, Clara felt a longing she couldn't quite name. For roots, perhaps. For something permanent in a life defined by transience. "What will you do?" Taza asked suddenly. "After your 2 months are finished?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know. California, maybe. Or Colorado. Somewhere Valdez can't find me. Always running." "It's what I know," she replied simply. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making the cabin tremble. In that brief, violent illumination, Clara saw something in Taza's expression that made her heart beat faster. A question unasked, a possibility unexplored. Morning revealed the storm's true impact. The modest creek beside the line cabin had transformed into a raging torrent, cutting off their planned route to the ranch. Worse, the wagon they'd been using to transport their supplies had suffered a broken wheel, its wooden spokes splintered beyond repair by a fallen tree limb. 2, maybe 3 days before the water recedes enough to cross safely, Taza assessed, surveying the flood with practiced eyes. Clara stood beside him, watching debris rush past on the churning surface. "And the wagon? Unusable until we can replace the wheel." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "I have spares at the ranch, but we're not at the ranch," Clara finished for him. They returned to the cabin in thoughtful silence. What had been intended as a temporary shelter would now be their home for days. Clara found herself examining the small space with new attention. The sturdily constructed walls, the stone fireplace, the single cot that neither of them had claimed the previous night, both choosing instead to sleep on blankets near the fire. "I'll check on the bull," Taza said, clearly needing activity to counter their forced immobility. Left alone, Clara took stock of their supplies. They had enough food for several days if they were careful, plenty of firewood, and the spring near the cabin provided clean water. They could survive their unexpected confinement in relative comfort, if they could endure the sudden intimacy of shared quarters. Taza returned with water buckets, having checked on the contentedly grazing bull. "He's happy enough," he reported. "The grass is good here. Unlike his accommodations at the mining camp where you found us," Clara said wryly. A hint of a smile touched Taza's lips. "You did what you could with limited options. A diplomatic way of saying I'm a terrible rustler. Perhaps cattle theft isn't your true calling." The gentle teasing surprised her, a lighter side of Taza she'd rarely glimpsed. Clara found herself smiling in return. The tension of their situation momentarily eased. They settled into unexpected domesticity as the day progressed. Clara discovered cornmeal among their supplies and set about making johnnycakes on the hearth. Taza repaired a leak in the cabin roof, then cleaned and oiled their saddles and tack. They moved around each other with growing ease, finding a rhythm that required few words. By evening, the cabin felt different, less like a temporary shelter and more like a shared space. They ate their simple meal at the rough table, rain pattering gently on the roof above. "Tell me about your ranch," Clara said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Beyond what I could see from the ridge." Taza's expression softened. "The main house sits on a rise above the river. My grandfather chose the location for its view of both sunrise and sunset. We've added to it over the years, a proper kitchen, a covered porch." Pride crept into his voice. "The orchards Sarah planted are bearing well now. Apple, peach, some plum trees hardy enough for this climate." "She sounds remarkable, your wife." She was. Sadness mingled with fondness in his tone. Strong-willed, full of plans. She saw the ranch not just as it was, but as it could be. Clara nodded, understanding. "That's a rare gift, seeing potential instead of limitations." "You have it too," Taza observed quietly. "You see opportunities where others might not." "You mean I see things worth stealing," she corrected, but without rancor. "I mean you have vision. It's just been directed toward survival instead of building." His dark eyes held hers. "There's a difference." The observation struck Clara silent. No one had ever spoken of her skills as anything but criminal, least of all herself. To have them reframed as misapplied strengths rather than inherent flaws felt strangely validating. As night deepened around the cabin, they again faced the question of sleeping arrangements. Clara gestured to the cot. "You should take it. You're too tall for the floor." Taza shook his head. "I've slept on harder ground than this. The cot is yours." "We could." Clara hesitated, then pushed forward with uncharacteristic boldness. "We could share it. Just for sleep," she added quickly. "It's wide enough, barely. And cold tonight." The proposition hung in the air between them, fraught with implications neither was ready to voice. Taza studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once. "If you're certain." "I am." They settled awkwardly on the narrow cot, both fully clothed, a blanket drawn over them against the night's chill. Clara lay rigid at first, acutely aware of Taza's warmth beside her, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Gradually, exhaustion overcame discomfort, and she found herself relaxing into the unfamiliar proximity. "Clara." Taza's voice came softly in the darkness. When I said the truth about explaining you to my ranch hands, I didn't mean to reduce you to just a thief." The unexpected apology touched her. "It's what I am. It's what you've done, not all you are." Clara turned slightly, finding his profile in the dim firelight. "What else am I, then?" Taza was silent for a moment. "Brave, quick-thinking, loyal when it counts." "Loyal?" She couldn't hide her surprise. "You saved my life in that canyon. Warned me during the ambush. Those aren't the actions of someone who only looks out for herself." Clara had no response to that. The qualities he described seemed to belong to someone else, someone better than the woman who'd stolen his bull and his mother's ring. "Why did you become a rancher?" she asked, changing the subject. "After being an army scout, it seems tamer." "I wanted to build something lasting," Taza replied simply. "Something that would remain after I'm gone." "Legacy," Clara murmured, remembering their earlier conversation. "Yes." His voice softened with sleep. "Something worth more than money." As Taza drifted into slumber beside her, Clara remained awake, contemplating the strangeness of her situation. She'd spent her life taking what she needed and moving on, never staying long enough to create anything permanent. The concept of legacy, of building something meant to endure, was as foreign to her as the comfort of sleeping beside someone she trusted. Yet in this small cabin, stranded by forces beyond their control, Clara found herself wondering what it might be like to stop running, to create rather than take, to belong somewhere or to someone permanently. It was a dangerous thought for a woman who'd survived by remaining rootless. More dangerous still when tied to a man who represented everything she'd never allowed herself to want. 3 days later, the creek had receded enough to attempt a crossing. During their unexpected confinement, Clara and Taza had fallen into a rhythm that felt almost natural, sharing tasks, conversing easily, and each night, sharing the narrow cot without crossing the unspoken boundary between companionship and something more intimate. They'd fashioned a temporary repair for the wagon while using branches and rawhide, enough to hold until they reached the ranch. As they prepared to depart, Clara found herself oddly reluctant to leave the small cabin that had been their private world. "Ready?" Taza asked, securing the last of their belongings. Clara nodded, unable to articulate the conflicting emotions churning within her. The closer they came to the ranch, the closer she came to a reckoning with her future, and the end of whatever this was between them. They crossed the still swollen creek carefully, leading the animals through the rushing water. The bull balked at first, but Taza's steady guidance eventually convinced the massive animal to trust the crossing. On the other side, they found themselves on a well-maintained trail, the first sign of civilization they'd encountered in days. "We're on ranch land now," Taza confirmed. "About 3 hours to the main house." As they traveled, the landscape grew increasingly cultivated. Wild scrubland gave way to fenced pastures where cattle grazed on surprisingly lush grass. In the distance, Clara spotted the orchards Taza had described, neat rows of trees heavy with ripening fruit. "It's beautiful," she admitted, taking in the evidence of years of careful stewardship. Pride warmed Taza's voice. "It was mostly desert when my father started. Every green thing you see was planted or nurtured by my family." A figure on horseback appeared on a distant ridge, silhouetted against the sky. The rider paused, then turned sharply and galloped toward the main house, clearly carrying news of their approach. "Miguel," Taza identified the distant figure. "My foreman. Word of our arrival will reach the house before we do." Clara's stomach tightened with anxiety. Soon she would face the judgment of Taza's people, no longer just the thief who had stolen his prize bull, but the woman who had returned with him after sharing dangers, meals, and sleeping quarters. What would they see when they looked at her? The ranch house came into view as they crested a final hill, a sprawling adobe structure with a broad porch and flowering vines climbing its walls. Smoke rose from the chimney, and several horses were tied at a hitching post nearby. Waiting figures stood on the porch watching their approach. "Your reception committee," Clara observed dryly, masking her nervousness. Taza glanced at her. "They're good men, fair-minded. They'll still see me as a thief, perhaps at first." His eyes held hers briefly, but that can change given time. They rode the final distance in silence, Clara straightening her spine and lifting her chin as they approached. Whatever reception awaited her, she would face it with dignity. For men stood waiting Miguel, the foreman Taza had identified, and 3 others. Their expressions ranged from open curiosity to barely concealed suspicion, as they took in Clara's presence and the bull plodding behind the wagon. Patron! Miguel called, stepping forward. We feared the worst when you didn't return. Hernandez rode to town for news and heard rumors of Apache trouble near Diablo Canyon. Not Apache, Taza corrected, dismounting. Valdez men. But that's a story for later. He gestured to Clara. This is Miss Winters. She'll be staying with us for a time, working on the ranch. Clara dismounted, feeling the weight of the men's scrutiny. Miguel's gaze was particularly sharp, taking in her trail-worn appearance and the pistol at her hip. The bull was stolen, one of the other men said bluntly. Was it her? Taza's expression remained neutral. As I said, a story for later. For now, Blackfoot needs attention after his journey. And we could all use a proper meal. His tone made it clear the subject was closed for the moment. The men exchanged glances but nodded respectfully. I'll see to the bull, the youngest of them offered, moving forward to take the lead rope. And I'll prepare food, another added, heading toward the house. As the men dispersed to their tasks, Clara stood awkwardly beside the wagon, suddenly unsure of her place in this well-ordered world. Taza seemed to sense her discomfort. Come, he said quietly. I'll show you where you'll stay. He led her toward a small building adjacent to the main house, a simple structure with its own entrance and a window overlooking the orchard. Sarah's weaving room, he explained as he opened the door. It hasn't been used much since. Well, it has a bed and privacy. Clara stepped inside, taking in the modest but comfortable space. A loom stood in one corner, covered with a cloth. Shelves lined with colorful yarns occupied another wall. The narrow bed was neatly made with a hand-woven blanket in shades of blue and rust. Thank you, she said simply, touched by the consideration of giving her a space that had clearly been important to his wife. Taza nodded. Rest if you need to. We usually eat together in the main house at sundown. Left alone, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, reality settling over her like a heavy blanket. The journey was over. The strange intimacy of the trail, the shared dangers, the quiet conversations by firelight, the warmth of Taza beside her on the narrow cot. All of it gave way now to the formality of employer and laborer. She ran her hand over the wedding band still on her finger, the prop from their charade that she'd somehow forgotten to remove. With a pang of something like loss, she slipped it off and placed it on the small table beside the bed. Outside, she could hear the men's voices as they tended to the animals and discussed Taza's return. Through the partially open door, a fragment of conversation reached her. Can't be trusted, someone was saying. A thief is a thief. The patron knows what he's doing, came Miguel's firm reply. He wouldn't bring her here without reason. She's trouble, the first voice insisted. Valdez won't let this go. Mark my words, there'll be more men coming. Clara closed the door quietly, shutting out the words but not their truth. She was trouble, and Valdez wouldn't let this go. She'd brought danger to this peaceful place, to these men who relied on Taza, to the legacy his family had built over generations. The realization sat like a stone in her stomach. Perhaps coming here had been a mistake. Perhaps the best thing she could do for Taza was to slip away in the night, drawing Valdez's attention with her. Clara woke before dawn, her few possessions already packed in a small bundle beside the bed. She'd spent much of the night planning her departure, waiting for the household to settle, plotting the quietest route to the stables, selecting which horse she would take, not the best, but not the worst either. Yet now, with escape within reach, she found herself hesitating. The previous evening's dinner had been a strained affair. Taza's men courteous but distant, their conversation careful around her. Only Miguel had made genuine efforts to include her, asking about her knowledge of horses after Taza mentioned her skill with the mare she'd ridden. Taza himself had been preoccupied, speaking privately with Miguel several times during the meal. Clara had caught fragments of their discussion, Riders spotted. And north boundary. Enough to confirm her fears that Valdez's men were encroaching on ranch territory. She moved silently to the window, gazing out at the pre-dawn landscape. The ranch slept peacefully, unaware of the danger she had brought to its gates. The orchards Sarah had planted stretched in neat rows toward the east, where the first hint of morning was lightening the sky. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Clara froze, her hand instinctively moving to the pistol on the bedside table. "Clara?" Taza's voice came quietly through the door. "Are you awake?" She hesitated, then set the pistol down and opened the door. Taza stood on the threshold, fully dressed, his expression grave. "May I come in?" he asked. Clara nodded, stepping back to allow him entry. His gaze immediately took in her packed bundle, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're leaving," he said simply. "I have to." Clara squared her shoulders. "Valdez's men are getting closer. I heard you and Miguel talking. So your solution is to run." There was no judgment in his tone, merely observation. "My solution is to draw their attention away from your ranch," she corrected. "They want me, not you. If I'm gone, they'll follow." Taza studied her for a long moment. "And our agreement? The contract?" Clara reached into her pocket and withdrew the folded paper they'd signed so many days ago. "Keep it. Consider the debt paid by my departure. It's better this way." "Better for whom?" The question caught her off guard. "For everyone. Your men, your ranch, you." "That's not your decision to make," Taza replied, a hint of steel entering his voice. "This is my land, my responsibility, which I've put at risk by being here." Clara's frustration broke through. "Don't you understand? Valdez won't stop. He'll send more men, better men. They'll burn your fields, slaughter your cattle, hurt anyone who stands in their way. You think I don't know what men like Valdez are capable of?" Taza stepped closer, his presence suddenly filling the small room. "The Apache have faced worse enemies than a desert gang lord. This land was defended against Comanche raiders, Mexican soldiers, and U.S. cavalry before Valdez was even born. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when I offered you shelter." His gaze held hers steadily. "When I brought you into my home." Clara shook her head, unable to comprehend his stance. "Why risk everything? For what? A woman you barely know? A thief?" "For the woman who warned me of an ambush," Taza countered. "Who saved my bull from drowning. Who tended my wounds and watched over me while I slept." The reminder of their shared journey silenced her momentarily. Taza took advantage of her hesitation. "Miguel spotted 3 riders near the north fence line yesterday. I've already sent word to neighboring ranches, the Garcias, the Wilsons, even old Begay on the reservation. They're sending men." Clara stared at him. "You're gathering an army?" "I'm calling on allies." Taza's expression was resolute. "Valdez has operated too long without challenge. It's time someone stood against him. You can't possibly think a few ranchers can stop him. It won't be just a few." Taza stepped to the window, gazing out at his land as it emerged in the growing light. "Valdez has made enemies of everyone in this valley. They've simply been too afraid to stand alone." Clara joined him at the window, following his gaze. "And you think they'll stand with you? An Apache rancher?" "With us," he corrected quietly. "They'll stand with us." The distinction sent an unexpected warmth through her chest, quickly tempered by reality. "I'm just a thief to them, Taza. Why would they fight for me?" "Because I ask it of them." He turned to face her. "And because you have information about Valdez that could help bring him down permanently." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" "You worked for him. You know his operation, hideouts, routines, weaknesses." Taza's eyes held a determined light. Knowledge that could end his reign over this territory. The realization of what Taza was suggesting slowly dawned on Clara. "You want me to help you destroy Valdez. I want you to stop running. he corrected gently. To fight back instead. Clara turned away, her mind racing. She'd spent her entire life avoiding confrontation, slipping away from trouble rather than facing it. The thought of standing her ground, of deliberately challenging someone as dangerous as Valdez, terrified her. Yet Taza was offering her something no one ever had before, the chance to be more than just a survivor, to be an ally, a partner in something meaningful. I need to think, she said finally. Taza nodded, respecting her uncertainty. He moved toward the door, then paused. The men are gathering tonight. Garcia's ranch hands arrive by noon, the others by sundown. His eyes met hers one last time. Whatever you decide, the choice is yours. But know that there is a place for you here if you want it. After he left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her packed bundle beside her, the embodiment of her lifelong pattern. Trouble appears. Clara disappears. Simple, effective, safe. She reached for her saddlebag, intending to add the bundle to her meager possessions. Her hand brushed against something hard in the side pocket, the silver hair comb Taza had given her at Hollister's trading post. She'd forgotten it was there. Clara withdrew the comb, turning it over in her fingers. Such a simple thing, yet it represented something she'd rarely experienced. A gift given without expectation of return. A gesture of protection disguised as affection. She glanced at her packed belongings, then back at the comb. Two paths stretched before her, the familiar road of solitary flight, or the terrifying unknown of standing her ground alongside the man who had tracked her across the desert and somehow found more than a thief. By midday, riders began arriving at the ranch, weathered men with determined expressions and well-worn weapons. Clara watched from the orchard as Taza greeted each group, their conversations marked by solemn nods and firm handshakes. She counted nearly 20 men by late afternoon, representing every ranch within 30 miles. She had unpacked her bundle but remained apart from the gathering, uncertain of her place among these men who had come to fight for their homes and families. What right did she have to stand among them? She who had never fought for anything but her own survival. Miguel found her there, offering a cup of coffee as he settled beside her on an upturned crate. The patron says you know Valdez's operation, he said without preamble. Clara nodded, sipping the strong brew. I worked for him for almost a year, and now you will help bring him down? The question held no judgment, merely curiosity. I don't know if I can, she admitted. Valdez is careful, protected. Miguel studied her over his cup. The patron believes in you. The patron sees what he wants to see. No. Miguel's weathered face creased in a slight smile. Taza sees true. It is his gift. If he believes you can help us, then you can. Before Clara could respond, a call went up from one of the men standing watch. Riders approaching, a dozen or more, moving fast from the east. The atmosphere in the ranch yard transformed instantly. Men reached for rifles, moved to predetermined positions. Taza emerged from the house, shotgun in hand, his expression grim but resolute. His eyes found Clara immediately. It's time to decide, he called to her. Stay or go, but decide now. In that moment, watching Taza prepare to defend his home against a threat she had brought to his door, Clara's choice crystallized. She would no longer be the woman who ran from consequences. For once in her life, she would stand and fight. She moved quickly to Taza's side. I'm staying, she said simply. Relief flickered briefly in his eyes before he nodded. Then tell me everything you know about how Valdez operates. Quickly. Clara outlined Valdez's typical approach, how he preferred overwhelming force at first, followed by strategic positioning to cut off escape routes. She described his lieutenants, their preferred weapons and tactics. Most crucially, she identified Valdez himself for Taza. He'll stay back at first, watching. Black hat with a silver band, riding a Palomino stallion. He doesn't expose himself until he's sure of victory. Taza absorbed this information, adjusting his strategy accordingly. "We'll draw them into the corral area," he decided. "Garcia's men on the north side, Wilson's from the south. The gaze hunters in the trees. We let them think they have us outnumbered until they're fully committed." The riders appeared on the ridge above the ranch, exactly as Clara had predicted, spreading out in a show of force meant to intimidate. At their center, a figure in a black hat sat motionless on a palomino horse, watching. "Valdez," Clara confirmed, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Taza positioned her behind the relative safety of the corral wall, where she could observe but remain protected. "Stay here," he instructed firmly. "This isn't your fight." "It is now," she replied, checking her pistol. The standoff began with Valdez sending a single rider forward, a lieutenant named Cortez whom Clara recognized from her time with the gang. He reined in his horse at the edge of the ranch yard. "Dine," he called. "We've come for the woman and the bull. Send them out and we'll leave your ranch standing." Taza stepped forward, his stance relaxed but vigilant. "There's nothing here that belongs to Valdez," he replied calmly. "Ride away while you still can." Cortez sneered. "You're outnumbered, Apache. Don't die for a white thief." "Count again," Taza suggested. At his signal, the hidden ranch hands emerged from their positions, rifles ready, faces set. What had appeared to be a small defense force suddenly revealed itself as a formidable opposition. Cortez's confidence visibly faltered. He retreated to confer with Valdez, whose expression darkened as he reassessed the situation. After a tense discussion, Valdez himself rode forward, stopping at a cautious distance. "Impressive gathering, Dine," he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "But unnecessary. My quarrel isn't with you or these men. It's with the woman who stole from me. Clara Winters is under my protection," Taza replied evenly. "Any quarrel with her is a quarrel with me, and with every man you see here." Valdez's cold gaze swept the assembled ranchers. "All this for a common thief? She must have remarkable talents." The insinuation hung in the air, crude and deliberate. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. Before Taza could respond, she stepped out from behind the corral, walking forward to stand at his side. "I'm here, Valdez," she called, her voice stronger than she felt. "No need to hide behind insults." Valdez's eyes narrowed at her appearance. "You've led me on quite a chase, Clara. Time to pay your debts." "I owe you nothing," she replied steadily. "The banker lived. You chose to pay him off rather than risk exposure. That was your decision, not my debt." "Brave words from a woman hiding behind ranch hands and an Apache lover," Valdez sneered. Clara felt Taza tense beside her but kept her focus on Valdez. "I'm not hiding anymore. These men aren't here for me. They're here because they're tired of living under your shadow, of paying your protection fees and looking the other way while you steal their cattle and threaten their families." Her words carried to the gathered ranchers, who murmured in agreement. Clara continued, finding strength in their support. "You're not facing a thief and an Apache today," she declared. "You're facing the entire valley, every ranch, every family that's suffered under your control." Valdez's face hardened as he glanced at his men, clearly calculating their odds. Clara recognized the look, the cold assessment of a predator deciding whether the prey was worth the risk. "This territory has tolerated you because they were divided," Taza added, his quiet voice carrying authority. "That ends today." Valdez's hand drifted toward his holster. Bold claims from a half-breed rancher and his whore. The slur was calculated to provoke, but Taza remained unmoved. "Last chance, Valdez. Ride away. Never return to this valley." For a tense moment, Clara thought Valdez would order an attack despite the odds. Then his eyes fell on something that made him pause, a flash of gold in his peripheral vision. Clara followed his gaze and spotted the source. Valdez's pocket watch, now in the hands of Sheriff Wilson, who had arrived silently during the confrontation and stood among the ranchers. "Looking for this, Valdez?" the sheriff called, holding up the distinctive timepiece. "Found it in your camp after that stage robbery last month. Got your initials right here on the back." The blood drained from Valdez's face. A stolen bull was one thing. A stage robbery with federal mail was another matter entirely. The watch was damning evidence. Clara saw the exact moment Valdez's resolve crumbled. His hand moved away from his holster, and he straightened in his saddle with forced dignity. "This isn't over," he warned, his eyes fixed on Clara with cold hatred. "Yes," Taza contradicted quietly. "It is." The celebration lasted well into the night. After Valdez and his men retreated, followed at a distance by Sheriff Wilson and a posse to ensure they left the territory, the ranch yard transformed from battleground to festival. Someone produced a fiddle, another a guitar. Wine flowed freely as the assembled ranchers reveled in their bloodless victory. Clara observed from the porch steps, nursing a single glass and declining invitations to join the dancing. The triumph felt hollow to her, not because she regretted standing against Valdez, but because she understood the transient nature of such moments. Tomorrow these men would return to their ranches, to their normal lives, and she would remain, what? A former thief with nowhere to belong. "You should be celebrating." Taza's voice came from behind her. "This victory is largely yours." Clara shook her head. "I just provided information. These men did the rest. Information that likely prevented bloodshed." Taza settled beside her on the steps, his shoulder nearly touching hers. Valdez expected fear and division. Instead, he found unity and preparation. "He'll be back." Clara couldn't keep the certainty from her voice. "Maybe not here, but somewhere. Men like Valdez don't simply disappear. Perhaps. But he'll find no welcome in this valley again." Taza studied her profile in the lantern light. "You seem troubled for someone who's just been freed from a dangerous debt." Clara managed a small smile. "Old habits. I'm not used to problems being solved by standing still. Usually, I'm halfway to the next territory by now. And yet you stayed." The simple observation hung between them, weighted with unspoken questions. Why had she stayed? What kept her tethered to this place, to this man, when every instinct urged flight? "I couldn't let you face him alone," she said finally. "Not after everything." She trailed off, unsure how to define the nebulous connection that had formed between them on the trail. The trust built through shared dangers, the understanding developed through quiet conversations, the comfort found in each other's presence. Taza nodded, accepting her incomplete explanation. "Your contract," he began cautiously. "The 2 months of work. It still stands if you want it." The offer surprised her. "Even though the debt is settled? Valdez is gone. The bull returned. Your mother's ring safe. The agreement was between us, not Valdez." Taza's eyes held hers steadily. "And there's plenty of work on a ranch this size." Clara glanced toward the celebration, where Miguel was enthusiastically demonstrating a traditional Mexican dance to appreciative onlookers. "Your men might not welcome me staying." "They would," Taza corrected gently. "You proved yourself today." Miguel especially spoke highly of your courage. "Courage?" Clara repeated, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "Is that what it was?" Felt more like fear. The bravest acts often do. They sat in companionable silence, watching the festivities. In the corral beyond, Blackfoot, the prize bull that had started their unlikely journey, grazed contentedly, unaware of his role in changing both their lives. "I had a new branding iron made," Taza said suddenly, "for this year's calves." Clara raised an eyebrow, puzzled by the non sequitur. "Oh, Miguel took it to town last week. It combines our traditional mark with—" He hesitated, then continued, with a small addition, a C worked into the design. The implication slowly dawned on Clara, sending warmth spreading through her chest. A C? For Clara? Taza nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. I told myself it was for Chiricahua, my mother's band. But I think I knew even then. Knew what? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering directly, Taza reached into his pocket and withdrew a familiar object. His mother's turquoise ring. He held it in his palm, the stone catching the lantern light. This ring has been passed down for 3 generations, he said quietly. My mother said it should go to the woman who would help me rebuild. Clara stared at the ring, then at Taza's face, searching for his meaning. I don't understand. Neither did I at first. His expression softened with rare vulnerability. When you stole it, I was furious. When you returned it, I was relieved. But now, he closed his fingers around the ring. Now I find myself wondering if it was meant to find you all along. The implication left Clara speechless. She had stolen his bull, his mother's ring, invaded his peaceful life with danger and complication. How could he possibly see her as someone meant to help him rebuild? Taza, she began hesitantly. I'm not. I've never been the kind of woman who stays in one place, who builds things rather than taking them. People can change, he replied simply. I've seen it in you already. Clara rose abruptly, overwhelmed by the direction of their conversation. I need to think, she said, echoing her words from that morning. This is all happening so fast. Taza remained seated, respecting her need for space. Of course, take whatever time you need. She retreated to Sarah's weaving room, her temporary sanctuary on the ranch. Inside, she paced the small space, thoughts racing. The silver hair comb sat on the bedside table where she'd placed it earlier, alongside Taza's father's ring, the prop from their charade that now seemed prophetic rather than pretense. Clara had never imagined herself as someone who could belong in a place like this. A working ranch with its rhythms of seasons and cycles, its permanence and purpose. Her life had been defined by movement, by the temporary nature of everything she touched. Yet over these past weeks, something had shifted. The woman who had stolen Taza's bull and his mother's ring was not the same woman who now considered staying to help him tend them. Somewhere between their confrontation at the abandoned mining camp and today's standoff with Valdez, Clara had begun to see herself differently. Not just as a taker, but as someone capable of giving, of building, of belonging. The realization terrified her more than any confrontation with Valdez ever could. Weeks passed. Summer yielded to early autumn, bringing cooler nights and golden light that transformed the orchards into corridors of amber and ruby. Clara found herself settling into ranch life with surprising ease, rising with the sun, working alongside Miguel and the others, retiring at day's end pleasantly exhausted. She'd stayed beyond the agreed-upon 2 months without discussion, and Taza had never mentioned her departure. The turquoise ring had disappeared back into his pocket that night, the moment passing without resolution. They worked together, ate meals at the same table, exchanged thoughts about the ranch's operation, yet maintained a careful distance that neither seemed willing to bridge. On a crisp October morning, Clara rode out alone to check the northern fence line. The task was simple routine, looking for breaks or downposts, but she welcomed the solitude. The mare beneath her, once stolen, now responded to her commands with trusting ease. Like everything else on the ranch, the horse had gradually become familiar, comfortable. As she crested a rise overlooking the property, Clara reined in her mount. From this vantage point, the entire ranch spread before her, the house, with smoke curling from its chimney, the barn and corrals, the orchards heavy with fruit awaiting harvest. In the nearest pasture, Blackfoot grazed among the cows, several calves bearing his distinctive build already visible in the herd. The sight stirred something profound within her, a sense of connection she'd never experienced before. This place, these people, had become something dangerously close to home. And that was precisely why she needed to leave. Clara had made her decision the previous night, lying awake in Sarah's weaving room. The longer she stayed, the harder departure would become. Already, the thought of leaving created a physical ache beneath her ribs. Better to go now while she still could, than to risk deeper entanglement. She turned her horse back toward the ranch, resolved to inform Taza of her decision that evening. He would understand. Perhaps he would even be relieved, freed from the awkward limbo their relationship had become. The sun was setting as Clara finished packing her few belongings. She'd left Taza's payment untouched on the table, the $100 he'd promised in their contract. Taking his money now felt wrong, though she couldn't articulate why. She saddled her horse in the quiet dusk, led her to the edge of the property, and mounted. One last look at the ranch, memorizing its contours against the darkening sky, and then she would be gone. Running again? Taza's voice came from behind her, startling in the stillness. Clara turned to find him standing beside an ancient juniper tree, watching her with unreadable eyes. "Not running," she corrected softly. "Just moving on. It's time." "Is it?" He stepped closer, his face illuminated by the last golden light. "By whose reckoning?" Clara sighed, unwilling to argue. "The fence line is secure. Miguel knows which trees in the orchard are ready for harvest. I've taught Luis how to gentle the new colts." She offered a small smile. "My work here is done." "Your work," Taza repeated thoughtfully. "Is that all this has been to you?" The question hung between them, demanding honesty Clara wasn't sure she could provide. "What else could it be?" she asked finally. "I'm a thief you caught, a debt repaid." "Are you?" Taza moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "Still just the thief I caught in that mining camp?" Clara looked away, unable to bear his searching gaze. "What happens if I stay, Taza? I become your ranch hand permanently? Your friend? Your—" She cut herself off, unwilling to voice the possibility that had haunted her dreams. "My partner," Taza finished simply. In all things, the directness of his statement stole her breath. "You can't mean that. I've never said anything I didn't mean." He reached for her hand, gently tugging her from the saddle to stand before him. "Clara, do you know where we are right now?" She glanced around, confused by the question. "The north boundary of your ranch. The exact spot where I found you with my bull," Taza corrected. "Where our journey began." Clara hadn't realized, but now she recognized the distinctive formation of rocks nearby, the same ones she'd used to pen Blackfoot during her brief escape. They had come full circle. "When I tracked you here," Taza continued, "I thought I was retrieving what was stolen. I never imagined I was finding what was missing." From his pocket, he withdrew the turquoise ring that had started everything. His mother's blessing, meant for the woman who would help him rebuild. "I'm not offering this because of a debt or a contract," he said quietly. "I'm offering it because somewhere between here and home, the thief who stole my bull somehow managed to steal something far more valuable." Clara's heart thundered in her chest. "What did I steal?" Taza smiled, the rare expression transforming his solemn features. "My heart," he said simply. "And unlike the bull and the ring, I don't want it returned." The confession, so plainly stated, so utterly sincere, broke something open inside Clara. Tears she'd never allowed herself to shed blurred her vision. "I don't know how to stay in one place," she whispered. "I don't know how to build instead of take." "Then I'll teach you," Taza replied, "as you've taught me how to trust again." He held out the ring, offering not just jewelry but roots, purpose, belonging. "Clara Winters, will you help me build something that will outlast us both?" In that moment, on the exact spot where he had once held her at rifle point, Clara made the bravest decision of her life. She stopped running. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Yes, I will." As Taza slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, not as a prop or disguise, but as a promise, Clara realized that she had indeed stolen something precious from this man. But in the taking, she had given something equally valuable in return. A future neither of them had dared imagine until a desperate thief stole a prize bull and, unknowingly, began to heal a widower's heart.